love it? Do we hate it? We'll find out today, along with other questions like organ donation. Is it the right thing to do? Should we, out of charity, donate our organs when we die? What is death? When do we die? Is it the same as medical death? And Lumen Gentium 25, can we dissent from what the Pope says? All these questions will be answered today on this episode of Now That's a Tough Question with Michael Lofton from Reason and Theology. And we'll get straight into that interview right now.
Hey, good morning, Joe. How are you?
Praise be to God. It is good to be alive and to be on again with you, and we're grateful for your time. Now, quick question. This is a tough question. All those books behind you, is that just a green screen effect, or do you actually own those things?
No, those are real books, and you should see that wall. That one has even more. So.
You are addicted to the books, I see.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Well, praise be to God.
I definitely prefer the actual hardbacks or paperbacks as opposed to maybe PDFs and Kindles.
You're a rad trad. I got it. Yeah, I do. We love books at our house too. We can't get enough. The problem is keeping my kids out of my private library. That's the problem. Because like now they're reading the G.K. Chesterton book, and I just don't want to be responsible for spreading that kind of stuff around. So, I
completely understand.
Yeah. All right. Well, I do have some tough questions for you. The phone lines are open at 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424 if you have a question for Michael Lofton today. All right. So this came up yesterday, Mike, in our after show where we casually conversate with our audience, and it was about organ donations. What is the church's stance on organ donations, being an organ donor?
Yeah, the best that I can tell, and it also kind of depends on what we're talking about as far as the context. I suppose if we're talking about somebody who is on life support, but they're declared brain dead, in cases like that, and there's absolutely no hope of recovery, I have seen it said that it would be moral to harvest if they had been voluntarily an organ donor. It would be moral to harvest their organs in that case. But ordinarily, you don't want to harvest organs from somebody who hasn't consented prior to this, prior to their death. And you don't harvest organs from a living person. Now, there are some exceptions, right? There are some organs that wouldn't necessarily be essential to the individual, but there are particular organs that you would not harvest unless the individual is dead. So the general principle is that you would harvest organs from dead individuals, with very rare, I guess I would say, exceptions. We could say that, well, in a sense, a person who's on life support and has been declared brain dead and there's no hope of recovery, in a sense, is already dead. They're just artificially being kept alive. In those cases, we could harvest organs. So it's a pretty tough issue, though. You'd have to take it on a case basis.
We were chatting yesterday about it in the context of, the joys of motorcycle riding. And, apparently the nickname for motorcycle riders among law enforcement is organ donors. Oh, wow. Apparently, because there's quite a number of fatalities or accidents. But the question comes up, I think, for a lot of us that are concerned about being organ donors and the potential risk of having doctors make decisions too quickly, especially in regards to brain dead. I mean, I think now there's been many cases to suggest that someone who's, quote, brain dead, unquote, is not necessarily dead and can actually recover. There are cases where people have recovered from that. Right. What do we as Catholics believe about that part of that question?
Right. If there's a chance of recovery, it would be immoral. So that would not be licit. It's only in chances where there's absolutely zero opportunity for recovery. And even then, it seems somewhat questionable. Now, I haven't seen any official declaration on part of the church on this particular matter. I've just seen different moral theologians who try to weigh in here.
All right, so here's the next question. Why was the church against cremation before? Before when is the question, and now all of a sudden it's perfectly fine. What's going on here with cremation in the church, Michael Lofton?
I wouldn't say it's perfectly fine. The church still prefers burial. It actually highly recommends burial still. But since 1963, cremation has been permitted if done for the right reasons. One of the reasons why historically Christians have been opposed to it is because normally it was generally pagans who cremated, and they were doing so for reasons that were contrary to our faith. I mean, we as Christians, we have always buried our dead because we believe in the hope of the resurrection, and the pagans did not, and so they cremated their dead. And for a very long time, the church opposed cremation because it would have given the wrong signal. It would have basically undermined the resurrection. Now, a lot of things have changed circumstantially to where that connotation is no longer there. And so the church has said, well, okay, technically, you could cremate if for the right reasons, and if you're not denying the resurrection of the dead, and if done properly, it's permitted, but it's not encouraged. It's not the recommended way. And there's a lot of guidelines that are involved as well when it comes to cremation. So you can't just have a family member cremated and take them to an unholy place and keep them in your home or something like that.
What about spread the ashes on their favorite garden or ocean?
You can't separate the ashes or put them in jewelry, anything like that. There are restrictions against that.
Now, why would we say you can't do those things? Like, what would be our reasoning for not wanting to do those things?
The reasoning is it's not respectful to the actual body of the individual. And of course, this person is going to be resurrected one day. And, we know Christ is going to judge the living and the dead. That very body is going to be resurrected again. And by separating the ashes, it just isn't doing enough dignity to that person.
Awesome. Great answer. If you have a question for Michael, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424, for questions for Michael Lofton. And we had a question that was commented on our past interview. So the first interview we did with you was an interview on obedience to our bishops and to the Pope. Yeah. What level of obedience do we owe to the Pope and to bishops? And we had a question come in. It says, according to Lumen Gentium 25, there doesn't seem to be room for dissent from the Pope's magisterium, Pope's ordinary magisterium. How can Michael suggest we can dissent from the Pope's ordinary magisterium, or that he can only might be part of the ordinary magisterium? Let me rephrase that for a sake of clarity. So, Michael, in the interview we did on obedience, were you saying that we can dissent from the Pope on whenever he's speaking in the ordinary magisterium? And what is the ordinary magisterium?
Yeah, this is a really good question. A lot going on here. So really quickly, the ordinary magisterium is not really the best term, although it has been used before by the magisterium. So I recognize that it's a licit term. The reason why I say it's not the best is there's just a lot of confusion surrounding what it means. But effectively, when somebody's referring to the ordinary magisterium in this context, they're talking about teachings that are authentic. They really are genuine teachings of the church, but they're reformable. They're not infallible, for example. That's generally what people are referring to. Now, in Lumen Gentium 25, it's true, it doesn't speak about withholding assent or dissent from magisterial teachings, but Lumen Gentium 25 is not the only document that we have. Lumen Gentium 25 also needs to be considered in the context where we can make distinctions between actual authentic teachings of the magisterium and private judgments and private teachings, if you will, of an individual who's part of the magisterium. For example, a pope. We would say the Pope is able to teach in his magisterium as a Pope, but we also recognize a Pope could speak as a private theologian, and that has been recognized for ages. So Lumen Gentium 25 should be read in that context, even though it's not making a distinction between non-authoritative teachings by somebody who is a Pope and then teachings by a Pope. It doesn't make that distinction, but we should keep in mind that distinction historically. Now, as to the question itself, why have I spoken about perhaps dissenting from something taught by the magisterium? I don't necessarily say we can dissent. I would say that in very limited circumstances, according to Donum Veritatis, we can withhold assent in very rare cases. Those cases being where you have done enough research and made sure that you know what you're talking about here, but there is a perhaps irreconcilable contradiction between something currently taught non-definitively, non-infallibly by someone in the magisterium, perhaps a pope, there's a contradiction between what it is teaching and what has previously been taught, and what has previously been taught outweighs the current teaching. In that case, you can withhold assent, but it is not something that, okay, well, that all of a sudden means that you can now just go on Facebook and start bashing the Pope and undermining the church. There are actually guidelines against that. So the church does say that there are rare cases where you could withhold assent, and this was being said after Lumen Gentium, mind you. But they are very rare, and they are for people who are very informed about that particular matter. You aren't to just flippantly do this. So your natural disposition is to be one of assent rather than withholding assent.
And so a follow-up question. We have about 2 minutes left. What's the difference between withholding assent and dissenting? And can you give an example of that we could withhold assent?
Yeah, so I mean, usually the way these terms are defined, withholding assent would be, I'm not going to believe or submit with my intellect and will, as the language says. I'm not going to believe this current non-infallible teaching because it is contrary to something else that has been taught that outweighs it. There's a difference between I'm not going to accept it, although I'm going to be respectful to the magisterium and I've done everything that I can to try to accept it. There's a difference between that and the person who hasn't even tried to reconcile the two. They haven't even tried to try to understand it and believe it, and they just immediately go to social media and blast the church and talk about how wrong the church is for teaching this and undermine its credibility. There's a difference between just simply withholding assent respectfully and dissenting on social media and in public.
I feel like you've been trolling me online there, Michael. I feel
no,
like
this is something that I've had to learn from experience.
I'm teasing. We only have about a minute and a half, maybe not even that, a minute left with Michael Lofton. There's a follow-up question here real quick from Lori, who wanted to know more about the guidelines for organ donations. Is there a place where you might send her to find more information about the church's teaching on organ donations? Or cremation. Forgive me, cremation.
Yeah, actually, but offhand, I don't recall the actual source document at the moment.
Feel free to
so
send
I
it my way,
but I can put it in the
back
comment
up.
section later.
Yeah, or send it my way. I'll mention it for tomorrow.
All right, praise be to God. Michael Lofton from Reason and Theology podcast on YouTube. Thank you for your time. It's always great to have you on for Now That's a Tough Question. Next time, I promise we're going to have some more doozies for you, and one of these days, we're going to get you.
If you like that interview, then check out some of our other interviews we've done with Michael Lofton. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share this interview with those that you think will find this interview edifying, informative, and inspiring.